Well, good afternoon, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope blog and podcast. I'm really excited today. I'm getting to speak with Ina Sahakyan. Forgive me, Ina, if I mess up your middle name. Ina, it's so cool and was so exciting for me. I came across it's kind of a docu-film, but not really. It's a feature film that was created about Aurora Mardiganian's story. Um, who was a survivor of the Armenian genocide, who came and lived in the United States, was in a 1920s film on her experience called Auction of Souls, based on her book, Ravished Armenia. Um, Ravished Armenia is actually, if you're very interested in it, you can find it pretty easily online. It's actually free to read. If you do some digging, you can find it. And it's a fascinating read of her experience during the Armenian genocide, which, for those who don't know, was a systematic killing of the Armenian people in First World War by the Turkish government at the time. The Turkish government now still does not recognize the Armenian genocide, so there are still Armenian genocide remembrance days in several states and countries commemorating the event and advocating for recognition. In fact, the United States just recently recognized this a couple years ago. Um, but Ina, I wanted to ask you, kind of get started. What gave you a passion? Because this Aurora's story, I have met very few people who know it, for one thing. And also, the Armenian genocide is not a topic that there are a lot of films or books on. Um, what gave you a passion to articulate her story and tell it through film?
You exactly highlighted two reasons, which were like starting points, because like for me being Armenian and growing up with so many genocide stories of my own family and others, and understanding that this is unhealed pain of my nation, which is not really told much and not really discussed much widely. I mean, of course, any Armenian knows it, but outside of Armenian community, it's not big percentage of the people that know the details about Armenian genocide. However, as a documentary filmmaker, I always thought that I will not touch this topic because for documentarian, there is not much left. By the time that I started to work already in the film industry, most of the survivors were passed away and archival materials are not many, and which was very important for me personally. I did not want to tell the victim stories
Hmm.
and what stories I was listening or coming, because it was kind of unexpected, and the Armenians were a small community in a huge Ottoman Empire, so it was not big resilience, and so the stories were really coming from victim perspective. But I was working on another project together with Zorian Institute. It's Canada-based human rights institute, which started to collect testimonies of Armenian genocide from 1980s with the survivors, and they have more than 700 testimonies recording, and they give me access to their archives, and I was going over different testimonies, and I come across with Aurora Mardiganian testimony, and it was so surprising because her story was so different,
Hmm.
and it was basically first time that I heard woman perspective of the genocide and of the courage of going against the odds that were around her. Uh, and, uh, and it was not anymore the story of the victim because, uh, I mean, of course, I don't know if viewers watched the film or not, but Aurora survived genocide not only by the lack of destiny. She made several times decisions of escaping, of
Yeah.
protesting, of finding her own ways. But that's not the most important in her story. The most important was that by coming to US, like safe land when everyone else was trying to just start new life and forget about past, she, understanding the heaviness, she agreed to relieve her own pain again and again
Hmm.
during the
Yeah.
production of the film and then during the promotional tour, talking about what she passed, through what she passed, only with a like main goal to tell the story of her nation and to help others.
Yeah.
So this was a story of a young woman. She was 14 when the genocide started. By the time that she was already a movie star, she was only 17, 18. Of a strong young woman who never obeyed the reality, but tried to change and fight for humanity and for the rights of her nation. So and back, like if you look, it was in 1920s. So this was just the start of everything, of the film industry in Hollywood, of activism, of human rights discussions. And she basically advocate of like and first stepper in many, many ways. And her story was not known,
Hmm.
even to most of the Armenians. So that was the reason that we at Bars Media, our small but strong production studio in Armenia, decided that we need to tell her story.
I wanted to ask you too, because I've read her book twice. I read it once in high school, and then I wanted to read it again before interviewing you and seeing the film, which thank you so much for letting me see it because I enjoyed it so much. It was refreshing too to have some film on it, honestly. The only other film I've seen on the Armenian genocide is The Promise, but it is kind of fictional characters that they're using to tell the story, and it's not an actual survivor, so it has a little bit less of an intensity there. Um, but I wanted to ask, in the book, the way that her parents, as well as her family members, die is honestly much more gruesome and dramatic, I guess, than was portrayed in the film, especially with her mother passing away. I wanted to ask you, was that like an artistic choice that you wanted to make it a little bit less
Mm.
um gruesome, or was it a different did you just make a decision based on something else?
No, Aurora's story basically was had different layers how it was told.
Okay.
The book was written when she was a young girl, and it was basically written by ghost writer Henry Gates, who was her
Yes.
guardian. If you watch the film, you know that. So she was not speaking English back then. She was telling her story, and Gates was writing it. And later on, fiction film script also has like its own script writers and differences. So I believe that because the whole campaign around Aurora's story back in 1919, which was Near East Relief campaign in order to fundraise for the Armenian orphanages, and it was basically one of the best designed human rights campaign. I think even
Okay.
up to now, if you look back how they work, I really think it has some additions from the writers and script writers. So they tried to change the story. That's my belief, because it's very, very hard to go back and understand where is the real truth
Yeah.
from 100 years ago, right? There's no anymore. I did not have chance to really talk with people who were witnesses. I had only
Yeah.
existing materials. I had existing materials of her testimonies, existing material of the book, and of the script of the fiction film. So especially with fiction film, if you become familiar with the script of fiction film, it is very much changed in order it will speak to American audiences.
Okay.
So there are other characters added, which were very minor role in reality in her life, but they like for example, her English teacher, who in film always next to her like this classic Westerner English speaking character who is guiding this poor Armenian girl in order to save, So all of these elements were added into the film, and I guess partially also into the book. However, for me as a documentary filmmaker, the most important were her testimonies. So I had several testimonies with Aurora, where she, at the age between 70 and 84 years old, she was talking about her experience and dancing. So mainly two main testimonies, one is Zoran Institute and another one from Armenian Film Foundation. And she answers the questions of the interviewer and she tells her story. Especially, so that was for me the main story constructing structure, but also I was with the team of the scholar checking the historical background and how much, like, where the truth can be reality. Like her testimonies, book, film, but also the historical general, this collective memory, and to understand if this event happened in this place at this time when she's discussing in her testimony or it's not. So we will have as close to the truth as possible. So in none of her testimonies, she describes her mother's killing in a way that it is in the book. Nowhere. The only place that she mentioned is in one of the testimonies, is the only sentence is that she's describing very detailed, for example, the killing of her aunts in both testimonies in different
which was in
years.
the film.
Which was in the film. She's describing it in detail, so you really know that she witnessed that part. And regarding her mother's death, she only says one sentence. She says, I can't remember it by heart now, but the meaning was like this: they killed my mother. I didn't see it with my eyes, but I found her body. This was the only sentence that she said in the testimony. So I really don't know how the killing of mother was. And that's why I tried to follow her testimony story, showing like that she found her mother's body. And so in whole film, it's not only that scene, you notice that scene, but in the whole film, if you compare with the book,
it's that was what shook me, because I remember when I've read the book, and for any who do, I mean, it's really hard to read. Like, it's really terrible. Which wasn't, I mean, super surprising in the sense of, I mean, if you do read historians who've written on the Armenian genocide, awful atrocities happened a lot. So it wasn't super, unbelievable, but it was super vivid. And I think there were just some things about it. I wondered, because you're, especially even in your documentary, you have the scene where she finds a gun and she goes back to her home to find it. That's nowhere in the book. In fact, it's not even mentioned that she goes back to her hometown. I don't think she's ever even near her hometown. And then when you showed the testimony of her actually talking about it, I was like, wait, but that's not even in the book. So, I guess from what you're saying, it's hard to completely know for sure, because obviously she's also lived a long time. She lived a long time. There was a lot of trauma there, obviously. But at the same time, you wanted to go off of what she had most recently said compared to the book.
That's not, but because she's sharing her real memories, and there's no only one testimony, it's several testimonies with her filmed in a different years.
Yeah.
So then, that's already kind of psychology. And so, like this part is the truth that she's telling about the details. She's talking about the events. So I really, when I'm working on documentaries, all my other films, I'm connected with people, right? With Aurora, I did not have chance to connect with her personally because she passed away by the time. But I trust her in her interviews. And there are several interviews, and again, I'm comparing them all. But the most important is also I'm comparing with all the historical details that I knew and we knew that. So by her past, working with historians, she was really close to her hometown. So she could return So it's not like with the locations that we know, with the facts where she has been. Then we also compare the story with these facts,
Yeah.
and basically, so we tried to like clean up her story from all the influences of the time and bring her
Mm.
dignity, uh, and restore basically as much as possible the historical truths connected with her life and her story.
Was that a lot of pressure for you? Like, how did you, because it's a responsibility. You have someone who's died, and you're telling their story, and you're trying to do it as truthfully as possible, but obviously you also have limitations. You can't ask them. You also weren't there. Um, so for you, especially being Armenian yourself, how did you wrestle with the responsibility of it as well as wanting to make something creative for audiences?
That's always in any case of filmmaking, even if you are doing poor observational documentary, you choose to trust your protagonist and then you choose your own artistic ways to transfer their stories to the audience. But that's not only in this case, that dilemma and ethical question you always have in any films that you are working on. Uh, so I there was responsibility as an Armenian woman of retelling another Armenian woman's story, and I really think that I did have a right basically to also have my artistic views, because if you look, it's her personal story, but at the same time, it's a portrayal of a whole generation, of my great grandmother's generation, and of all the events that were happening in her character through her personal story. So
Yeah.
I had this responsibility to retell her personal story as truthful as possible, but also to represent the whole events and background and the situation like of a time, and like all the horrors of what was happening, but being as close to her as possible. So, and for me, it was very interesting how to add the artistic solution, and we openly mentioned that the film has also artistic license, because there were gaps in the stories as we talked about it. Also, if we just directly represent and directly tell the story as she's telling to us, it will be very, very heavy for the audience. So we did have this task, how to make it basically lighter with the artistic tools, like for example, not showing direct the killing of the family members, but
Yeah.
showing all of that through the symbols. Or for example, um, the scene of the family theater, that's my artistic uh, input into the film. She talks that they were spending a lot of time with their like parents, that they had many games and family gatherings, but she never talks about specific play. But that way, knowing like Armenian tales and
Yeah.
traditions, putting together with her personal like story, it comes with this solution of using the symbols, the scenes, the memories, the
Yeah.
game of the colors and the impressions, and not just directly telling the story that she was telling in her testimonies. So it was long and complicating period, and a lot of work of a big group of creative people working
Yeah.
together. But yeah, I mean, I think we did okay. I always have this question: if she watched the film, will she approve it or not? But I want to believe that she would.
I was gonna, going off of that too, another thing I noticed in her book that was written by the journalist, it was very, there was a huge emphasis on Christianity and the Armenians being killed because they were Christian. Um, and I know doing some research, when I was studying the Armenian genocide myself, it was talking about how it wasn't just being Christian, the Christian religion was part of being Armenian back then, but it was also an emphasis on Armenians being different than Turks, being Armenian instead of Turk. And I wanted to ask, in the film, there are some scenes where Aurora prays, but it didn't seem as much as an emphasis as in the book that was written by the journalist on her behalf. Um, was that also based on research and time you spent with the historians, or?
Uh, Both. That's again based on the research and on her testimonies. It's as I told, these are by two narrate like guiding sides how to tell the story. So the emphasizing of the Christianity in the book is connected with the whole campaign of the nearest relief
Yeah,
and the whole campaign of also geopolitical campaign, which was the part of the political narrative of the time. Uh, because I mean, I don't want to go deep into the details, but like after the First World War, there was this hope for the U.S. government, for the Wilson's like policy during the Wilson's presidency to have Armenia as American mandate in the
yeah,
region. And for that narrative, it was important to emphasize that this is the small Christian nation living among, as they were calling by the language of that time, barbarians. And this is the story of a beautiful Christian girl who needs to be saved. And it was not only
right.
Aurora's story. There were many other stories that were part of the newspaper articles, part of other elements of the campaign, stories of the kids, stories of other girls, and the whole narrative was the minority of Christians living among Muslim need to be saved, and
Yeah,
was for charity reason, because back then it was a huge charity campaign and it raised like hundreds of millions back in 1919, which is turning into the billions now, and which was amazing and very important for the all the lives that were saved after the genocide.
yeah,
But also, again, as I'm talking about geopolitical situation, then everything changed after Turkey became republic, after a change of political president in the US. All the geopolitical wings changed to the different direction, and there were, of course, treaties and business and political relationship between Turkey and US
yeah,
established. So all of these were forgotten. So of course she was Christian, and Christianity is very important for her also in her testimonies. Um, but it's not the main driving source in her personal story. It's more will to fight, basically fight back, not only by the guns or swords or as she says, but fight back with humanity against the reality. And that's what I wanted to highlight in her story. But of course, she was Christian, she was praying, and that's also in the film, but not as the main layer as it was
yeah,
back in 1920s. But here I want also to mention this small part, which is very important in the film, that shows that the intention of killing Armenians was not connected only with Christianity. It is the hate campaign that's continuing until now. As you know, recently, like in September 2023, Armenians of Artsakh were ethnically cleansed and forcefully deported, displaced from their like homes, living there for 1,000 years in Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh. after these 9 months of the blockade, which is all like direct continuation of the um, genocide policy of Turkey and today already Azerbaijan. But the scene that I wanted to mention about the film was the killing of her nephew, of a 9-year-old boy Suren, when he was, and that's in part also in the testimony, but she's telling it through her own words, when he was saying like, I will change my religion, I will become Muslim, don't kill me. And still he was shot. So even changing religion was not the solution
Yeah.
in that time. So yeah.
I, you know, an another thing that was you showed a little bit and it was really interesting artistically too how you showed, I mean, she went through a lot of sexual abuse, which is said in the book, but as well as in the film, that's pretty much very tastefully, I think, made known to the audience that that's happening a lot. Um, I know specifically that the book was talking a lot about a harem that she ends up in near the end of the book, where there's a lot of girls. I mean, it's a very dramatic scene where there's just all these conversions. If they don't convert, then, they're killed. And one was actually hanged, in the room, and all the girls could see it. The film showed a little bit of the sexual experience that she had, the abuse that she was experiencing, but it didn't highlight too much the harem part. Was that, and forgive my ignorance on this, was that also something that she did not mention as much in her testimonies that you didn't put into the film?
Again, both she did not mention much in the testimonies about
Okay.
harem. I think she briefly mentions. So she just briefly mentions that she was there, and she did not mention several harems in the book. There are several harems in her testimonies. She only mentioned it briefly, so I can't know for sure how many harems were there or were not. But also, for me, it was not important to show all the brutalities and sensitive
Yeah.
content. I had the task as a filmmaker to show her past of these 5 years from 1915 till 1920, from happy kid passing through genocide, coming to America, becoming immigrant, then becoming a Hollywood star, then all this heaviness of the PTSD,
Yeah.
then finding, so it was so much happening, and I
Yeah.
I really wanted to
Ton.
show this arc of person, like change of a person, but at the same time following her main goals of, as I mentioned, of staying human, as of helping others, of sacrificing herself, and the small details of the like horrors that were around, which were so many. If you start to show everything that was happening with Armenians during the genocide, nobody can really watch it. So for me, it was more important to tell her story in a way, just
Hmm.
not to terrify the audience, but to follow her. So for me, it was important to show that she had this sexual slavery,
Yeah.
and she passed through it, and she was strong enough to escape from there even, and not to kind of not to how to say in English, not to take it as a reality, but like
Yeah.
to fight against all of that in her own way, also to pray while you are still there. Like these small scenes, like small emotional scenes,
Yeah.
were enough to show the all. And then we need to leave also to the imagination of the audience, because there are many things that you are leaving, you're just telling this start to happen, then
Yeah.
audience understanding the rest of what is happening.
It's interesting you were talking about not wanting to terrify the audience. I know for some directors and filmmakers, they really do. They really like to immerse you in something that is hard many times saying, you know, the more you're immersed in it, the more visceral it's going to feel and it's going to hit you and you're not going to forget it. But what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you you want to do it artistically to show that there is obviously pain and suffering, but the point is not the pain and suffering. The point is the story of the person who went through the pain and suffering. So there's a different focus. Am I getting that? Am I understanding that right?
Yes, and the person who was r- surviving that pain and suffering and keeping her humanity, not everyone can do that. Like,
Yeah.
she did not become, like, for me, the most important, like, really, really most important part of the film. And I knew that I will end the film with this sentence from right the first view over her testimony, was her last statement that the film ends with, which is, I don't want the revenge. I don't want Tarek to be killed
Yeah.
now, but I want that justice will be reestablished, that they will answer in front of the law. So
Hmm.
that's her personality. And it's not that I do not want to show the torture and suffering and the heaviness of the story, but I don't want to lose the audience. This is maybe coming also because from the part of the responsibility. Because I'm responsible in front of Aurora, in front of my grandparents, in front of my whole nation, to make a film which the audience will follow.
Yeah.
And the audience will follow her real story in the way that she's overcoming all of this. But
Yeah.
I will lose the same audience if I choose in the beginning of the film, in the first 20 minutes of the film, all her 8 family members died. If I just show how they were murdered from the like testimony or the book explanation, half of the audience will leave the theater because
Yeah.
it's horrible. So for me, the goal was to show her humanity and that the audience, most importantly, will empathize with her and will follow her and will learn the rest of the story. Maybe with
What?
other film, I will not be afraid of. So it's specific choice for this specific film, not
No,
that
I
film.
mean, I was blessed by that because when I had first started researching, I mean, it was very hard for me and it was dark and it was, I mean, because I feel things deeply and researching it was, I mean, it's very heavy and you'd come out of that and you'd feel like you'd been from some sort of cyclone. So it was a gift getting to see your film because it was so heartfelt and you could feel it, but it didn't hurt so bad that you couldn't look at it or couldn't keep watching. Um, for you as an Armenian, you know, the Armenian genocide is still something that in many ways has not been completely addressed because the Turkish government has not said, you know, this is something we've done, or has made some sort of restitution for. Like, what would justice look for you as an Armenian? Like, what kind of justice would you like to see for the Armenian people?
It's very heavy and strange question, but strange because my answer is changing with the time. Because several years ago, like before 2020, I would say it should be recognized, it should be apologized, it, you know, and that will help us to heal. Now that's not enough anymore because the most important now, after 2020 bloody war of Nagorno-Karabakh and after the recent genocide of September 2023, is that this will not repeat again. And this is really becoming true and very horrible situation. And in this context, I'm not talking only about Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh. Of course, it's my pain and it's my nation and it's much more connected to me. But this unpunishment of the crimes against humanity, of the war crimes, of the crimes of genocide that started to happen in the 20th century with Armenian genocide and then continues up to now,
Yeah.
is is giving birth of more violence around the world. and that is painful to watch. And if the justice will be established, the Armenian genocide will be accepted and recognized by Turkey, most importantly. If the war crimes and crimes against humanity of Azerbaijan in 2020 were during the COVID, the war which started during the COVID, when the whole world was fighting with COVID, Armenians were fighting with COVID and with unjust, well, like war which was put it on our nation's shoulders. We maybe will not have situation in Ukraine afterwards and in Israel, Gaza right now. So this continuous punished, unjustified situations
Yeah.
in the world are reason for more horrific events to be born. And yeah, so justice will be basically understanding and not really punishment, but the acceptance from the law perspective and from just the system side of view, and starting from Armenian genocide and continuing to all events up to date already.
And I wanted to ask you, because talking about justice and also talking about the film, that struck me. At the end of the film, you see all these horrible things that are done to her and all these experiences. Even in America, you see that the people that come alongside her, maybe with good intentions of wanting to use her story to save others, end up exploiting her in a lot of ways and causing additional suffering and hardship in America. Um, at the end, for her to say, I just want justice for them. I want them to be able to, paraphrasing, to be able to be tried and to go through a justice system, not just be executed and removed like they did with us. For you as the filmmaker, like, after you've filmed all this, you've researched all this, was it as easy? I don't want to say it was easy for Aurora, but was it for you harder to say that in your own heart, having made the film, than it would be, having that at the end of the film? Was it hard for you to resonate with that statement?
No, not at all. Because I also do not want revenge. I am in the same page with her. I want the systematic acceptance of the justice, which will result then of not repetition of the crimes. So, and hearing that from her, who physically suffered, who mentally suffered, who
Yeah.
directly suffered, for me is one of the most important statement of humanity.
Mm.
Statement of staying human. I don't want the revenge the same way that they did to us. I want just justice to be reestablished, because that means the whole past answer. I'm sorry, my English is not enough sometimes, but
Totally okay.
that means to stop the repetition of the crime. Uh,
Yeah.
the answer that she gives in her death statement is that it should be like the justice should win, so
Yeah.
it will not be repeated anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the most important. uh, you know if the punishment uh, is the understanding of governments
Yeah.
that this will not pass, like this will not work anymore, then you're just trying to stop the whole system of the genocides and wars and crimes. And while just revenge is like continuation and the repetition
Yeah.
of the same horrible situation.
Do you have hope that a government can kind of achieve that form of justice? Because, like you said, even now, living in a current century, so many governments mess up and so many governments cause pain and suffering. And so, a lot of times, the cry for humanity, the cry to love and cherish and to have human dignity for people, is something that has been cried for centuries because governments have not always, or people groups, however you want to put it, have not always um, cared about human dignity, have always seen one, group, one race as superior than another. Um, for you, like, do you think that justice is achievable for a human government?
I hope, and I know that if we will not continue to tell the stories like this and not to fight
Yeah.
for that happening, it will not happen definitely. But if everyone in their own sphere will continue this basically belief and fight for justice, one day we will have better world. If you look back into the history, actually after the Second World War, we had the period of quite strong humanity established, of balance at least in the world. And it started to ruin after, like, mainly after 2020,
Yeah.
again, because it was not punished by the justice system. And I can't, and I don't want to talk much about this, but my new film, which I'm now starting to work, it's in development, is about another woman who is exactly fighting for justice with the strength of the law, of international justice
Mm.
system, and I'm following her path. So maybe I will have more answers at the end of that film.
Well, Ina, it's been such a gift, and again, I was privileged to watch it, and it was encouraging to me to see a filmmaker who was taking an interest in something that is, so core to our history and bringing remembrance to things that are important to remember. Um, I did want to ask one last question for you. I know that the documentary film has been streamed for a certain period. Is there a chance that this will be accessible on a streaming service for people to pay or to see it in the future at some point?
Right now, it is acceptable on PBS through this PBS passport system.
Okay.
So it is basically now in the streaming on the PBS. It's not available online, but you can
Okay.
stream it through the PBS POV program. And later on, we are working most likely from the spring. We are working that it will be available on other digital platforms as well.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, well,
Mhm.
listeners, again, you were listening to Ina, and she was discussing her film, Aurora's Sunrise. I highly recommend taking a look at that um, through the PBS channel that she was mentioning, as well as, doing some research yourself. There's some good interviews out there with her talking about the film, as well as a trailer that you can see to see if it's of interest to you. But Ina, I want to thank you so much. I mean, it was a privilege to talk with you, and thank you for bringing awareness to such an important topic.
Thank you so much, Daniela. It was my pleasure also. It's so interesting to talk with a person who knows the whole history, book, and insight. Not standard conversation at all. Thank you for that.